Hello and welcome back. This is Elisa Ruffin with Leading Educators, and you are on the Grade 11 ELA Unit 6 video series. We are in Week 10 and we're on Lesson 46, continuing our analysis of the story, The Mantis in Rain Clouds. The past couple of days, you have been responding to some reflection questions, writing additional or alternate dialogue to the story, reviewing and reflecting on the point of view and its impact on you as the reader. And today we're going to move on to some further analysis of the story, responding to some questions and some reflections. Remember that when we are done with the lesson activities for today, you need to share your learning with a family member, caregiver, or friend. Complete the weekly fluency activity using a page from the text, and do an additional 20 minutes of reading a day from a text of your choice. Also remember that it's that time of the presentation where we do our riddle of the day. Remember, 4 picks, 1 word. You are doing a word association game where you look at some images and determine what's the one word that they all have in common. So now's the time to gather those individuals who've been participating in this part of the lesson with you and enjoy it. And if you're going after this as an individual challenge, that you are clearing your mind and preparing to warm up for the day. Are you ready for your 4 images? Because here they come. Also keep in mind that I like to provide hints so you at least know how many letters are in the word, so you're not grasping all around trying to figure out what word in the entire language is this. So you are going to pause if you do not want that hint, because the hint is that it's a 7-letter word. What 7-letter word do these 4 images have in common? All right, the answer is growing. Growing, ladies and gentlemen. Each of these images represents the idea of growing. And, not to be corny, but that is what you all have been doing as you've engaged in these lessons across text. You also have been growing in your ability to continue to unpack text, analyze them, think critically about them, etc. So we're going to move on and continue to grow by making sure that we have our resources that are necessary for us to engage in this work today. So let's see. We need our Mantis in Rain Clouds text. We need your learning packet, Week 10, Lesson 46 note catcher. A pen or pencil and a smartphone or other mobile device is optional, as always, if you'd like to access the text digitally. Keep in mind our background information, remembering who our author is, Leslie Marmon Silko, and the fact that this story is about a group of 2 groups of people who have history together, shared history that puts them sometimes at odds with each other as it relates to cultural tension. This text definitely addresses the essential question, what do stories reveal about the human condition, and more specifically, what role does power and authority play in the human condition? Our learning targets for today. I can identify examples of irony in the text, and I can explain the author's use of irony and how it reveals the true nature of the relationship between the priest and the Pueblo community. So moving on to another element of craft and structure. Yesterday we talked about point of view. Today we're talking about irony. So we're going to do a reread or a skim through the Mantis in Rain Clouds. And we are also going to be reviewing some annotations from previous lessons to help us as well. In the think section today, we are going to be considering the idea of irony. So we want to review what irony is overall and also what the different types of irony are. So there's 3 different types: situational, dramatic, and verbal. And so all of those things you're going to take under consideration as we respond to some reflection questions. You're going to talk with a family member, caregiver, or friend today, responding to the question, what makes something ironic? So this is where the think section information can help you. And I am also going to model for you how you can be thinking about that question as well. And you're going to provide an example from any short story or from a real life experience where you thought something was ironic, and record your answer and response in the note catcher. In addition to the read, think, talk, write portion of the routine for today, you're going to be completing the irony chart in your note catcher, and you're going to close by choosing one example of irony that you identified in the story and explain how changing the point of view, so this is where yesterday's learning comes in, from which the story is written, could eliminate the irony. So when we again go back to this idea of analyzing craft and structure, authors make very intentional choices. So if irony is something that whether it's situational, dramatic, etc. Is something that an author wants to be present in a story. Which point of view the story is told from can determine what type of irony can be employed in the plot. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's model our approaches to some of the reflection questions in our lesson here. Starting with the question that you're supposed to discuss with a family member, caregiver, or friend. What makes something ironic? Provide an example from a short story. So it can be this short story or any other short story, or from real life experience. So there's a couple of ways to approach this. You can review the definitions provided in the Think section. So we didn't go over those at length yet, but you can if you'd like to go back and do that. Or you can simply remember that in its simplest form, irony is the difference between what's expected and what happens. This reaches way back to some text from weeks ago. All right. And so if you have a general sense of what irony is, you can talk about that without going through the specific types of irony from the Think section and what your overall impressions of and how you've absorbed and interpreted what irony is, and then come up with and generate some examples. So that's how you approach the talk section for today. Then you're going to move on to the write section today that has you diving more deeply into the 3 types of irony. So let's review more specifically now. So situational irony occurs in a story when something happens that contradicts the reader's expectations. So it's surprising. Okay, so the reader thinks, you think one thing is going to happen, and then something completely opposite that contradicts your thought or expectation happens, right? Dramatic irony occurs in the story when readers or viewers, so you're a reader, or if you're reading a text, or if you're watching a movie or TV show, etc., you know something because of the point of view that the character in the story doesn't know, right? So think about those suspense thrillers, for example, that you may have watched before, where you feel compelled to yell out to the character, like, don't go in that room, because because you've already seen what's happened in a previous scene and that character hadn't arrived yet. You know what's in that room and they don't. That's dramatic irony. And there's a reason why you're able to pull off that dramatic irony, because you are in on information that a character doesn't have. And there's only one way to make that happen, and that's only if it's a third person point of view, right? If your perspective was only limited to the character, you wouldn't know it was coming either. But because it was third person point of view and you're coming from the observer point of view and you have more information than the characters do, dramatic irony is possible. And then verbal irony occurs in the story when a person says something that deliberately contradicts what it actually means. So this is wordplay here. Okay, so sarcasm can be seen as a type of verbal irony. So those are the 3 types of irony. And so your responsibility now is for situational irony. You need to identify a part of the story when something I didn't expect happens. Okay. Then for dramatic irony, you're going to identify a place in the story when I have inside information that the characters don't. One or both characters do not. Okay. And then verbal irony, I have to examine dialogue to see if a character is intentionally using language that gives a different impression than what he actually means. So is someone being kind of coy or sarcastic, right? So using terms that both characters know, but one of the characters has a completely different intention or meaning behind how he or she is using the term. So those are the 3 types of irony, and that's how you approach trying to locate them in the text. And that's what you're going to do in the write section for today. And to close, you're going to choose one example of the 3 types of irony that we just reviewed, that you identified in the story, and explained how changing the point of view from which the story is written could eliminate that irony. So I've already given you an example of how dramatic irony works as it relates to the context of movies, right? So one of the ways that dramatic irony is pulled off in a movie is if the character knows more than if the viewer or the reader knows more than what the characters do. That also happens in text. If you have more information at hand because it's told, for example, from the third person perspective, and it's the omniscient perspective where you know everything, and the characters have no idea, then that allows for dramatic irony to happen. If I take away that third person point of view, especially the omniscient point of view, and I only have information based on the first person point of view from a character who's immediately involved in the story, then I lose all sorts of anticipation of what could be happening because I don't know outside of that limited person's point of view, that limited character's point of view. So depending on the type of irony you choose, whether it's situational, right, which is something that turns out differently than what the reader expects, or it's dramatic, which I've just explained, or verbal, and that we're using words, but the words being used are using the meaning behind it are intentionally different. If you change the point of view from which the story is told, how would that erase the ability to have irony? Because what plays into irony is the information that the reader has or the viewer has ultimately. And point of view directly impacts the amount of information that you have access to, as we know from the lessons from previous days. All right, so keep all of that in mind as you move on. You need to reflect on point of view and how it determines what the reader knows and doesn't know, and how it has a direct impact on the type of irony that the author is trying to pull off. And point of view can determine whether or not I have insight into the character's motives. That also plays a big part in irony. So keep those two things in mind as you try to address the closing activity for today. So now it's your turn to read, think, talk, write. Review through what situational, dramatic, and verbal irony is. Talk with a family caregiver or friend about what you find to be ironic, whether it's a real life example or an example from a short story that we've read or that you've read outside of this. And then you're going to move on and complete the irony chart, finding examples of the 3 types of irony from the text, and close by connecting your understanding of irony to how point of view allows irony to take place in a story. Okay? If at any point in time you get stuck and you have questions, you can always pause and replay this video as often as necessary, and you can reach out to a teacher via email for support using the structure provided here. When you have successfully completed these activities, which I know you will share your learning with a family member, caregiver, or friend, complete the weekly fluency activity using a page from the text, and do an additional 20 minutes of reading from a text of your choice. We have reached the end of another lesson, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you enjoy unpacking the mantis and rain clouds a little bit further and really getting down to the nitty-gritty about irony. The more you learn about the choices that authors make when they craft their writing, the better you become as a writer. And I know that that's been happening with you. So join me as we do another lesson, continuing to wrap up our learning on Unit 6.